Thanks so much for tuning into the Amy Oliver Show on this Monday, April 30th. And because it is a Monday during the legislative session, we dive right into work. We bring State Senator Kevin Lundberg on the line. Senator, last week you called me with what I consider to be some bad legislative news. I took a look at this particular bill. It's a disaster. Introduced, I think, as Senator King, a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, one of your fellow Republicans, said 109 days into a 120-day session, and the supporters of SB 178 introduce major legislation to increase Colorado's renewable energy mandate. This is going to hit consumers where they can least afford it, right in their pocketbooks.
Once again, we've seen this happen before. At the end of the session, the enviros basically come up with some creative idea that ratchets up the costs for utility bills, and we the people pay it.
You know, this, I don't want to even say it amazes me because it doesn't anymore, but this has been dubbed, because of the legislative process that has surrounded SB 178, it has been dubbed Son of 1365, referring to the collusion that surrounded House Bill 1365, the fuel switching, and how particular stakeholders were left out of the process. So there were only a handful of groups involved in this process of 178, left out notably Tri-State Generation, which provides power for most of our rural electric co-ops. They were left out. Black Hills, which is the state's second largest investor-owned utility, left out of the process. And you, Senator King and Senator Roberts, were particularly you seem disturbed by not just the bill, but by the process.
Well, yeah, actually, we probably ought to describe what's happening here so that people would understand. This is concerning the renewable energy portfolio standard. In other words, how much renewable energy has to be used by utilities by certain dates, and the target is 30% by, I think it's 2020 or somewhere in there. And right now, utilities are having to put more and more renewable energy online, which is much more expensive than conventional energy sources for electric power. This bill changes the formulas that are put in place, and in essence, will drive up that requirement by, best view is maybe 6% more renewable energy will be required when we reach that 30% point.
And what it is there's a multiplier. So for every dollar you spent on 1 kilowatt of renewable energy, an investor-owned utility gets credit for 1.25 hours. If the energy is produced within the state of Colorado. Now, multipliers are not unusual. I actually have a map here of states with multipliers. West Virginia has multipliers. Minnesota has multipliers. There are, I think, about 5 or 6 states. Texas has multipliers. There are a number of states that have multipliers within them. And it's a way so that, and it was done initially, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Senator, because we acknowledge that solar and wind are very expensive, and to make the legislation, the mandates more palatable, they included these multipliers. So if you provide a megawatt or purchase a megawatt of, or a kilowatt of renewable energy, you actually get credit for 1.25. So our actual renewable energy standard, while it's 30% is what we say it is, it's actually 24%. So,
correct.
And this bill would put it up to an actual of 30%.
Yeah, and you know, the way government goes, things usually do get really complicated with weird formulas that only the technicians can follow, and even there, I think they often get confused by their own logic and language. But bottom line on this one is that the current standard is essentially 24% is the goal. If 178 goes into place, then it becomes 30%. And the reason they're arguing for this is a preferential system, this multiplier, because it's only for Colorado-based, and some courts in other states have said that that's unconstitutional. That violates, because of the way it works, it violates the interstate commerce provisions of the Constitution. Okay, I'll accept that there's a problem with their formulation, but their solution is not to keep the standard at the same real rate. It's to drive the rate higher, and that's going to cost a lot of money, and we see this again and again and again. 1365 is the bill that was run, what was that, last year?
No, 2010.
Okay, yeah. And it drove the cost up for other reasons. It seems like every time we turn around, they have another excuse to pile even more costs on top of the costs that are just kicking in because of all the environmental EPA regulations that we have to live with regardless.
Now, you introduced an amendment, and I thought you brought up a great point, because, and you, in testimony, the AG's, John Suthers, the Attorney General's office, testified in support of this bill, SB 178, increasing the renewable energy mandate, by saying that, questioned whether or not it was constitutional to have the multiplier apply only to Colorado-based renewable energy sources. Okay, and as you said, okay, that's fine, I accept that. But rather than make all renewable energy more expensive, you said, why don't we just say, okay, the multiplier now applies to any renewable energy source regardless of location. And I think, if I heard that testimony correctly, the AG's office conceded that likely would satisfy the constitutional requirement.
Yes, that is correct. In addition, when talking to the Public Utilities Commission representative in the hearing, he acknowledged that virtually all of the renewable energy thus far is Colorado-based. So it's not like we're putting a lower standard in place that is replacing the one-to-one multiplier or non-multiplier that's for out-of-state. Almost everything is under the multiplier right now because it's all Colorado-based. So my amendment simply said, okay, let's take away the constitutional problem and let's just let the marketplace determine where the best sources for renewable energy will come from, be that in Colorado or elsewhere.
And continue with that 1.25 multiplier.
Correct. Of course, in the committee, that was not acceptable, so they voted that down.
Why?
Well, I can only speculate as to why the vote was cast, but my speculation is that the extreme environmental folks did not really do want to set a much higher standard for renewables. And actually, a representative from the solar panel industry did come and testify, and it was very clear he wanted nothing to do with any solution other than drive the renewable energy standard that much higher.
Right. And that was a gentleman named Neil Laurie from the Colorado Solar Energy Industry Association. What I thought was very funny about his testimony in particular, and I actually said I couldn't believe he had the audacity to call eliminating this multiplier good for transparency for consumers. And the reason is, a year ago, he testified against Senator Renfro's bill, transparency for ratepayers, so that ratepayers know exactly how much their bill costs by fuel source. He was completely opposed to that bill, transparency for ratepayers. Now he comes back trying to use that same argument so that he can drive up the renewable energy mandate.
Yeah, very, very transparent what the intention is, isn't it?
Yeah, and I want to ask you this, too. I thought was interesting. Both Black Hills and Tri-State Generation, which, of course, Tri-State, folks around here who, some of those on the Eastern Plains will know that Tri-State is who provides power for their local co-ops, their electric co-ops. Together,
REAs.
Yeah, and together, Black Hills and Tri-State represent roughly 1 million ratepayers in Colorado. Yet, supporters of SB 178 never spoke with either of these two power providers. And they didn't find out about it till a couple of days before the bill was even introduced, and both are opposed to it.
Yeah, they know that it's going to cost them millions and millions of dollars to put in place. Yeah, and it will be paid for by we the people.
Black Hills has said it could cost ratepayers an additional 25% on their energy bills.
Yeah, and the reason it's such a high cost is right now the renewable energy standard is at a very low level because it's just ratcheting up to the full amount, and they're quite obviously and logically taking the least expensive renewables and putting those online first. But as you get to that top point, it gets more and more expensive as you have to go to more exotic systems. You've exhausted the other possibilities. There's only so much wind power you can put on because it has such an erratic supply system, and solar panels are extremely expensive, and sometimes transmission lines become very problematic when you are seeking this very high standard. So that final additional amount that they're adding as a renewable requirement is very, very expensive stuff.
We have to take a quick break, Senator Lundberg, but coming back, one of the things I liked getting to that is, where this mandate ratchets up. You pressed the PUC, Gene Camp, who was there to testify on behalf of the PUC, you pressed him about what this was going to do to the 2% rate cap and to consumers' electric bills. And what was interesting is literally he silenced for probably 5 to 6 seconds. There was nothing, because I went back and listened to it over and over again. And then he responded, and I thought his response was just classic, and I want to get your take on it. 9:20 the time, I'm talking with State Senator Kevin Lundberg about a movement at the state capitol to increase the renewable energy mandate in the state of Colorado. 6% is what it would go up. It's 20%, a 20% increase from where it is right now. This is going to cost you a fortune.